Right, it's 10 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen, so we'll get underway. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Electricity Authority's stakeholder briefing for its transmission pricing methodology proposal and its proposals in relation to the pricing principles for distributed generation. I'm Brent Leighton, I'm the Chair of the Authority. Those of you who hadn't seen me for some while, I'm not imminently dying from losing all my weight, but I am slightly smaller than I was last time we presented an issues paper on these matters. But the issues paper itself has not got smaller. It's gone in the other direction. And nor is the crowd to come and see the proposal that we have. I can see there's clearly quite a lot of interest in it. Carl Hansen, the Chief Executive, will give a presentation, and following that we will answer questions from stakeholders, should there be any. So Carl, over to you.
Thank you, Brent, and thank you everybody for coming along today. Unlike last time, we put the paper out at 8:30, so you may have already had a chance to have a quick look at it. Before I get going, I want to introduce some of my team. On the left here in the checked shirt is John Rampton. He's the General Manager of Market Design and has responsibility for both papers that are released today, the TPM and the Distribution Pricing Principles. And to his right is Alistair Dixon, the Principal Advisor in the Market Design team, and he has been one of the key resources that has been working on transmission pricing over the last few years. And we also have in the audience here people from Concept Consulting, David Rowan and David Weaver, and Roger Proctor, who's been working with us in our team, and I see we have Buttle Finley in the room as well. You may have, if you've seen the paper, realised that we have had the independent cost-benefit analysis undertaken by Oakley Greenwood in Melbourne, so we've been working closely with them. Well, I'm just going to take you through it, provide a bit of a structure, try to give you a bit of a sense of why we've taken the approach we have on various things, and then we'll open up for questions. I'm expecting to speak, say, for 45 to 50 minutes, but if you have any questions of clarification, please stick up your hand and I'll try to notice and stop, and we can get that sorted at that point. And then certainly want to draw on my panel here, particularly the chairman, for answering some of the questions we have, some of the questions you may have. So first of all, on the transmission pricing methodology, we have been listening to the submissions that we got on the options working paper and the engagements that we had following that, and we have strived to make a much simpler and pragmatic approach, but nevertheless one that's very consistent with our principles for pricing. One of the first things you may notice is that compared to 2015, there is no deeper connection component to the transmission pricing proposal out today, and that has a significant impact in terms of some of the financial impact on participants, but not a material impact on the economic cost-benefit analysis. The approach that we've taken, we feel, is still highly principled. It's very much aligned with our decision-making in an economic framework. I'm not going to go through that framework because you've seen it several times. If you've had an interest in transmission pricing, and looking at the audience, I think just about everybody here I've seen in previous transmission pricing forums. But what we have done is that we've added Chapter 5 in the consultation paper is a fairly significant chapter that elaborates on that decision-making framework. We found that with the submissions to the options working paper, that people had dug down into the nuts and bolts of the economic analysis, and we felt that to give you, our thinking and the way we analyse things at that level, we needed to elaborate on that DME framework, and so we've done that. And in doing that, it became clear that we should just maybe clarify a few things a bit more And so we've made it much clearer that our focus is on service-based pricing and cost-reflective pricing. So think of service-based as who is paying the charge. So we're talking about the charges, the beneficiary pays charges going to the people that receive the benefits of an investment. And you only receive the benefits if you're receiving the service. So it's very much about who is paying. And then the second element is cost reflectiveness, which is about the level. At what price level do we set for those that are going to get it or pay the charge? So that's been the essence of the framework in a nutshell, and it is very much the same framework that we've been using for thinking about distribution pricing. Okay, that wasn't... It's not exactly the presentation I had, but this will be fine. I changed some of these slides, but it'll be fine. So there are four main problems with the current TPM. We talked just before about it not being service-based, it not being cost-reflective. We have talked a lot about that in previous consultations, and we've gone to quite a significant extent in this consultation to elaborate on that, bring out the details more, be clearer about which component we're talking about there. But we've also added in the consultation paper, I guess, a degree of heuristics so that you can kind of just get a good common sense feel for why the current TPM is causing a range of problems. And the lack of cost reflectivity and the lack of being service-based is leading to, in our view, incentives for very poor investment decisions, not just in the grid, but actually by parties that make investments to avoid using the grid or to use the grid at different times than when it's not economic. So we have, in the paper, made it much more explicit that with the current TPM altering how people use the grid, that in fact alters the investments in the grid. So a good example is parties that might have a gas-fired generation paying for gas transmission will make different location decisions if they also have to pay for interconnection or if they don't have to pay for interconnection. So that kind of location choice affects how much of the grid you're using, and then it actually affects the subsequent investments that have to be made. And if you take as a given that party has located in a certain area and then circumstances change, you've got to make the investments to supply the transmission investments to meet the needs. So the TPM affects use, which affects investment. But there's also the other second point there under incentives for poor investment, which we've made in the past, which has really been about that the TPM actually provides poor incentives for people to provide the kind of information that the Commerce Commission and Transpower need to make the best decision. So one is about use affecting investments, the second one is about people participating and providing information for investment decisions. So you'll be able to read more about that. And then our fourth component there that we've spoken about many times is that we do continue to believe that the current TPM is not durable, it's not service-based, it's very poorly cost-reflective, and that is causing all sorts of tensions, particularly in the AC part of the network. It's not just an HVDC issue anymore. There's so much more understanding compared to 2012 about some of the risks of parties exiting and closing down their plants. So, we feel that what we're putting forward today actually is appropriately comprehensive and provides a pricing proposal that will be principled but pragmatic for all those situations. So our proposal is simple. It has two main, the current TPM, as you know, has a connection charge. We're largely retaining that. In terms of the two main charges under the current TPM, it's the HVDC and the interconnection. and we are talking about replacing those two charges with two charges, the area benefit charge and a residual charge. The area benefit charge will allocate the costs of recent grid upgrades and new investments coming in the future. We'll allocate those through to the parties that benefit, the areas of the country that benefit from those investments. And then the residual charge is to collect the remaining amount of revenue that Transpower needs to remain whole. And we're proposing to spread that pretty flat across the country. The third key component that is quite significant in our proposals is the prudent discount. And under the current TPM there's a prudent discount, but it's fairly narrow, and we are proposing to to broaden the range of circumstances in which parties can apply for a prudent discount. And this is largely because we have still a very substantial amount of money being collected under the residual charge, 500 million out of the 917 million, and that's very much a broad brush spread charge. It can cause people to make decisions that are not economic, and so if they are needing to if they can put a case for a discount to avoid them disconnecting or avoid them closing down, then that may work out to be in the best interests of New Zealand and the best interests of other consumers and other transmission customers. So, slide 6. This wanted to elaborate on how our area benefit charge affects parties. Under our proposal, grid investments that were made or approved from 2004 with a value of greater than 50 million at time of commissioning, and Pole 2, and any new investment would be subject to the area benefit charge. And so this chart here just shows you the current makeup or distribution of charges under the current TPM, but if I push the button here, it just shows you that a lot of those assets that I just talked about, their costs will be allocated to the parties that benefit, and the modelling shows that the parties that are benefiting are in the Auckland and Northland regions. So the area benefit charge, we think, although it has roughly about our proposal has roughly about a 0.5% increase in prices for electricity consumers at the household level overall, we think that's just initially. We think putting in place this kind of charge will create a lot more incentives, much stronger incentives for more efficient transmission investment, other investments being more efficient, and we expect the costs to be lower than otherwise. And so longer term, we expect this proposal to lower prices for electricity consumers. So I'll have to get over the fact that these are not the slides I was intending to present. Getting a little bit annoyed with that. We will get there. It is pretty much what I was going to present, but there's a lot of detail in this slide, and we had reduced it. So the overview of the authority's main proposals, main components of our proposal. The first one, as I mentioned, was the connection charge is being retained in roughly its current form, but we have got a number of components that we're proposing that Transpower consider. We're calling them added additional components, and they can either consider those and proceed with them at the same time they do the main reforms, or they can keep it under review and present later. So it's largely the existing connection charge. We in the paper call that an access charge for connection. You pay to access the connection asset. You don't pay a usage charge through to Transpower. It's an access charge, and it's very much a beneficiary pays type charge. Only people that benefit from the connection asset pay for it. That's the current regime. The area benefit charge, the key features of it, and apologies for the lot of writing on this slide, it was reduced, is that load and generation will pay for the area benefit charge in proportion to the expected lifetime benefits that Transpower estimates they will get from each investment. And as I've indicated already, it will cover, we're proposing that it covers Pole 2 and investments since May 2004 if they exceed $50 million in value, and any new investment. And we're proposing that for new investments exceeding $5 million in value, there'll be a standard method that will apply. So that standard method, it's more rigorous, more detailed, more granular. It will apply to all these, the Pole 2 and the post-2004, and to any new investment exceeding $5 million. But we're suggesting to Transpower that you come up with a simpler method for investments below $5 million. And the reason why we want to do that is we don't want to create a sharp discontinuity between the above $5 million and below $5 million. There is something in the order, I believe it's $400 million a year in the small investments, Alistair? Yeah, $400 million a year in below $5 million investments. So it's a big bucket. And if we just simply allowed the $5 million below investments to go into the residual, there's a big dividing line that would be created, and really quite significant incentives for people to recharacterise and to push for their investments to be characterised as below $5 million and done in various different stages. So we think it's far better to have a simplified method, and it'll be a bit more rough and ready. Under the simplified method, the obligation on Transpower would be to identify the main beneficiaries. And there's a range of features I'm going to talk about now for the standard method that won't be available for the simple method. The standard method, essentially, we've featured into it, you know, the area benefit charge is kind of like an average charge in the sense that the full cost of an investment gets allocated to all the parties that benefit from that investment. So it's kind of like an average, you know, everybody that benefits is going to pay their share, but to achieve some good incentive effects, if there is a party that actually is about to change their use of the grid, then they can be signalling to Transpower that Transpower's forecast of their benefits is wrong, and that they will actually be reducing or increasing their use of the grid, and they can then face a marginal cost adjustment. And that achieves some pretty useful economic benefits for the country. The third item there, number C, is allows optimisation of asset values. So overall, under the Commerce Commission regime, there is no optimisation for the overall Transpower's overall grid. What we're proposing is to allow optimisation for assets that are actually covered by the area benefit charge. And of course, if you have optimisation in the sense it reduces the value of assets in certain circumstances that would be covered by the area benefit charge, then that gap, that revenue deficit, will flow into the residual charge, because the residual's the catch-all. So we detail in the paper the circumstances under which optimisation would be available. It's essentially if the optimised cost was 20% lower than the original cost. So for example, for post-2004 assets, we are proposing that the valuation method is depreciated historical cost, DHC, which is what is used now. And so if there was a major change in the use of the grid that relating to those assets that led to them being, you know, really substantially underutilised, then they'll be able to be optimised down, so it'll be optimised depreciated historic cost, ODHC, and then for new investments, we're actually proposing that they get valued at replacement cost. However, we are saying in the paper that maybe there's some alternatives to that that are consistent to what we want to achieve. The reason why we're proposing replacement cost or something similar to it is that we think that with transmission, it's a utility type asset, and the age of the asset doesn't really alter very much until the last years or so, doesn't alter very much the service that you get. It's not an aesthetic kind of asset where you care about the way it looks. So it makes more sense to relate the charges on a flat level, because the service and the benefits tend to be flat over time until you get right towards the end of the asset. So we think replacement costs or something like that is better than depreciated historic costs. But we went with DHC for post-2004 assets because we're bringing in a new regime, and if we went to replacement cost, we'd actually end up over-recovering on them and just really reintroducing higher charges for an area when in fact they've already been paying some of that. Okay, so it's for durability reasons and, you know, transition into the regime. The last element there is we recognise there can be other changes that are quite substantive that could alter the pattern of benefits quite materially, and so there is a requirement there that Transpower can do a re-estimation of the benefits if there's a material change in circumstances. But we're not specifying a regular, so it's not like every 5 years. It's an uncertain period of time, and it's just for when Transpower considers that there has been a material change or maybe a material change, and they need to go through a two-step process. One, first of all, identifying a material change and consulting on that, and then secondly, looking at if that's satisfied, looking at how would that affect the charges. And as I said earlier, the simplified method would determine charges using a simple basis, wouldn't be catching B, C and D. They would not apply to the simplified method. The residual charge, a bit like the interconnection charge in the sense that both are postage stamp, although I had a chart that's no longer there now, but I was going to show you how the interconnection charge isn't really postage stamp. You saw it a little bit in that previous heat map. It's all over the place, really. Nominally it's flat rate, postage stamp, but actually people can manipulate and alter their use of the grid in a way to reduce their charges. So what we've done is come up with a residual charge that is also broad-based, postage stamp, but it's calculated on historical physical capacity. Now there's three different options for that. One is the customer's transformer capacity. Another one is the line capacity feeding that customer. And the third one that's open to Transpower, they will make proposals to the authority about these three, which one they think is best. The third one is gross anytime maximum demand, but it would be gross AMD in the 5 years prior to today. So it'd be anytime maximum demand, adding back in any distributed generation, or there'd be a threshold level for that for practical reasons, possibly adding back in demand response and other things, but that would be up to Transpower to come up with the specifics about gross AMD. And so that would be a proxy for physical capacity. And in fact, the financial modelling results that we're going to show you today are based on gross AMD in our paper. I think just for 2014. So it's not for a 5-year period in our paper, but that is what would be the requirement on Transpower in putting forward their TPM proposal to the authority. The last element there in the residual is that it actually includes roughly about $200 million for Transpower's overhead costs, but also its unallocated operational costs. So that's a very significant part of the $500 million that the residual charge would capture. And the board has been very much interested in considering your views. They're really keen to hear your views about two options for that, because it's a lot of money, the 200. Must be so much money I'm getting. So it's important you realise it's not, that 200 million isn't just overhead, it's unallocated operational costs. What we're proposing in the paper is to adopt an approach that's very similar to the current allocation. The current allocation for overhead is that generators pay as generation through the connection charge, and then it was based on the connection charge, and then load under the current TPM pays based on their interconnection charge. Of course, sometimes generators are load because they use load, they draw power to start up and so on. So they do pay some of that overhead through the interconnection charge. So what we're suggesting or proposing is that we continue with the connection approach for generation, and we use the residual charge to allocate the overhead to load. But however, the board is also very interested in an alternative approach we want your views on, which is called the surcharge. So the surcharge is essentially take the bucket of money that Transpo has to raise, deduct off the 200 million overhead, put that separate, calculate the connection, area benefit and residual charges, the residual charge without the 200 million, and then allocate the 200 million in proportion to each person's total transmission charge, which omits the. So it's just a surcharge on the other charges, and that's got real simplicity with it. It's very transparent, but there are some trade-offs there. So we'll look forward to your views on that. The key thing, as I was indicating earlier, was the prudent discount policy. And we did propose in early consultations to extend the life, to allow parties that are getting prudent discounts to have the discount related to the expected life of the asset rather than it being limited to 15 years, which is the current PDP. So that's point A there. The point B is 4 different circumstances that we think prudent discounts could be available to a load customer. The first one is one that we have previously consulted on, and that is when a load customer could in fact build generation and disconnect from the grid. They might connect through another network. So we've previously consulted on that, and we think that will be good to avoid that kind of investment if it's not economic for the country, if it's just been driven by the residual charge, which is a flat rate socialised charge. Point 2, B2 there, is very much allowing for the possibility that there may be some transmission customers where the transmission charge is actually a very significant part of their input costs. And therefore that charge, the transmission charge, could be affecting their decisions whether to stay in the country with their plant or to exit. And again, for the same kind of reasons, that that residual charge could be causing people to make exit and entry or exit and stay decisions that are actually inefficient from the economy's point of view and not for the benefit of consumers in New Zealand. So we're allowing for parties that are at material risk of closing down to apply for a prudent discount. However, we have to understand with the prudent discount policy, the current one and what we're proposing, is that it's a win-win, right? You only give a prudent discount when the party would actually exit or disconnect and build generation, and therefore we wouldn't collect the revenue from them anyway. So giving a discount means you collect some of the revenue. That actually reduces the impost on all the other customers, and it reduces the economic costs because you're avoiding inefficient investments. So the prudent discount is a key part of our economic efficiency that we want the TPM to bring forward. Now, one thing that's not might be covered next. What we're proposing in regard to the discounts for exit risk is that the discount would be linked to the factors that drive parties' decisions to stay or go. So if it's the world price for your outputs, then the discount would be linked to that. So if a party is at risk of exiting because their world price of output has come crashing down, then if that world price recovers, that discount would evaporate. And that's the logical thing. We want all parties to contribute to the common costs and the overhead costs. And this is the kind of thing that you see in a workably competitive market, and we have seen it in other electricity contracts, but you see it right across competitive markets, that businesses will not just burn off customers just because they are in a risky exit situation. They will consider what's the best outcome that will lead to efficient use of their resources. Item B3, load customers can establish, if they can establish that their transmission charges actually exceed the standalone cost of the service being delivered to them, or the standalone cost of energy being delivered to them, the delivery costs, then they can seek a prudent discount. And the last one being that if you have an embedded customer, they may actually still have transmission charges that are a very significant part of their input costs. And just because they're embedded behind a distributor, it doesn't mean to say that they shouldn't be treated the same as someone that's directly connected. So we're allowing there for a bit of a pass-through through the distributor. I've already mentioned about the link there to, say, the world price of a product or service. And a key feature in the consultation paper is we realise that this extension of the PDP really adds quite another degree of importance in terms of the analysis of applications. And while we think Transpower are very well placed to assess and even approve those investments, we are interested in stakeholder views on whether the final approval should be made by the Transpower board or by the authority board or by some other independent party. So we'll look forward to your submissions on that. This slide just says, going over a bit more about the prudent discount policy again as a mechanism for having the charges adjust to real-world conditions, but also talked about the optimisation that's available under the area benefit charge, and talked about the revision of charges potentially if there's a material change in circumstances. So these three components are to ensure that we have a TPM that's durable and can adjust with the conditions, but it is a TPM with an area benefit charge that is actually based on the forward-looking estimates of the benefits of the parties. So it's not like our 2012 proposal, which was based on half-hour SPD model runs, and it was the actual benefits that were calculated every half hour. It's based on a one-time estimate by Transpower of where the benefits lie from a grid investment during the investment approval process, and then that would be it. So while Transpower has to come to the authority with its TPM and a proposal for how it's going to do that benefit estimation, we've given one view and we've done modelling on that. They could just adopt what we are proposing, but if they've got a better way of doing it, they can put that forward. Once they have got an approved methodology for calculating benefits, they will apply it. And once they've applied it once for the asset, that's it. And so the charges would be very simple to calculate year after year. They're just in proportion to that estimated benefit that has already been calculated. It's just the multipliers. So very simple to have the area benefit charge once the benefits have been estimated. Overview of the authority's proposal, additional components. I mentioned earlier we've got these four main components in our TPM that we want, if we approve the guidelines, we would want Transpower to progress. We also want them to consider whether to put forward a long-run marginal cost charge, whether to put forward a KVAR charge, which to deal with the voltage support, and whether to adjust the provisions around the connection charge for staged commissioning of assets, for charging for assets when a grid investment actually changes the classification of an investment. So you have connection assets, once a party puts in a link, it converts it into interconnection. and it leads to cross-subsidisation. So we want them to consider that. They're very aware of this. They're dealing with it at the moment in regard to the investment that Waipa has made between Te Amutu and Hangatiki. And the third component is the allocation of operating and maintenance costs in relation to connection assets and area benefit assets. So in addition to those additional components which Transpower will consider, and they have the flexibility of deciding whether they proceed with that at the same time as our four main components, or whether they think they've got enough on their plate and that they better get those done expeditiously and then keep under review whether to do those additional components. And then at the bottom of that slide I can see we've got changes outside of the TPM. So this is code amendments that the authority would progress in regard to the loss and constraint excess. As you know, we have a view that loss and constraint excess is actually a market bunch of revenue that actually is for paying for transmission assets. It comes from the nodal pricing market, comes from the fact that the differences in nodal prices are actually a transport charge, and that surplus is actually really relevant for funding transmission assets. And you know that if you had a grid that didn't have economies of scale, it had what economists call constant returns to scale, then the LCE would fully fund all of the grid and you wouldn't need any TPM. So that's the first fundamental, is to get those refunds in place. And then the minimum power factors code amendment, which is related to the KVAR. In terms of impact of the proposal by customer, this first chart shows the broad aggregate impact in terms of dollars, millions of dollars per year. For North Island Generation is a little bit of an increase because they will now be paying an area benefit charge for some of the assets, particularly the Wairaki Ring, but also there's others that they do get some benefits from. The South Island Generation, you can see a significant reduction there. That's because they are no longer, in the proposal, the only parties funding the HVDC. Actually, our modelling indicates that the majority of the benefits, more than half of the benefits, flow to North Island consumers. So one way of thinking about the HVDC charge was that it was a pretty crude kind of beneficiary pays type charge. It was back in the day, yeah, we're doing this HVDC and it's the South Island generators that are going to benefit, they're going to pay for it. But you know, with a much better technology and much better computing around it, and with the market having started and market clearing engines, we've been able to determine that in fact the benefits are not just for the South Island generators, they're also for the North Island consumers, and that many of those North Island consumers are industrials. And if you want to get efficient outcomes, it's important that all the beneficiaries pay. So that's the reason for that reduction there. I'll come back to the mass market load. If we go to the right-hand side of that chart, you can see a reduction there of about $21 million for NZAS in terms of the design of the area benefit charge and the residual charge. So in terms of that, the reason for that reduction just reflects the fact that NZAS, being a very large party, pay for a high proportion of the interconnection charge. That's that grey bar. But with there being investments, very significant investments that have actually increased interconnection charges by quite substantial amounts, NZAS's charges have been going up and up and up, but their benefits haven't changed and they haven't got additional services. It's actually the people in that red area in the heat map that I showed you. It's the north of the north. So it's just inevitable that if you adopt an area benefit charge, people that aren't benefiting from additional investments, they're not going to be paying for it anymore. So that's what's driving that. It is offset to some degree because compared to our 2015 proposal, we took on board from that consultation a lot of comment from people that we should adopt the same kind of approach for allocating the residual to industrials and distributors. It should be the same allocator. If you remember in 2015, we had considered a different approach between those two classes. And in fact, even the major electricity users group recommended we adopted the single approach. So we've gone and done that. So that has led to a jump in the charge there for other major industrials. It's one of the key factors. The other key factor is that the area benefit charge, of course, falls on industrials that are in those areas that benefit from the grid upgrades. Overall, if you include the NZAS and the other major industrials, it is a slight increase in charges overall, but you can see the composition there is quite different. Looking at the mass market load, of course the Upper North Island mass market load, the increment there reflects the fact that that's where the benefits are flowing. If I show you on this slide here, the blue bar is our estimates using the SPD model on a forward-looking basis, our estimates of the benefits accruing across the country, across the networks, for the 6 largest investments. So that's the blue bar. The red bars are actually the area benefit charge. And you can see that the areas that have actually got quite significant benefits are paying for them under the area benefit charge, but the charge is actually substantially lower than the benefits. So the benefits are in the form of lower wholesale electricity prices compared to what they would otherwise get, but also in terms of better reliability. And so in the SPD modelling, we included not just a vol for when there's actually there would have been outages, but a virtual price offer, so that you remove an asset. If there's a lot of outage, that's not going to happen. Someone's going to put in generation. So we have modelled that synthetic or hypothetical generation and put in a virtual price offer. And that's all detailed in the paper. So that's the story from that chart there. Now I wanted to explain this one in quite a bit of detail. What you can see in this chart is that in 2015 we released our paper and we put a chart in the paper showing the percentage impact on the final household bill of the option of one of the options in that paper. Everybody ignored it. Someone went and found a table in the dark, deep part of the document which talked about the dollars per year for each ICP. And they didn't read the footnote. The footnote said this is not the charge for households. This is just spreading it evenly across ICPs. Well, of course, if you have a major consumer and you treat it equally with a small household, it ain't going to reflect the impact on households. So what happened was that we got a lot of commentary in the media about the impact in the regions, supposed impact on households. That's the green bar. But that wasn't the impact. People just misread the table. We did put out a clarification. That was the orange. We said, people, it's actually the percentage impact we talked about, and we put out the table converting that to dollars per year. So you can see that the impact at the household level was actually substantially reduced, substantially different than what people were commenting on in the media. So that's the impact per the status quo in our 2015 discussions. The impact from our proposal today is in the blue bar, and it's much more moderated compared to the orange, and obviously hugely different from the green. And that blue, more moderate, partly because for the area benefit charge we thought it was more pragmatic and reasonable to set the threshold for applying that to existing assets to a $50 million threshold. So in 2015 we had brought that down to $20 million. We figure that it's actually important that we get this regime in place, that there isn't too much in the form of the additional work on Transpower to get it in place. So the 50 million threshold identified 10 assets, 10 existing assets, and they were the high value ones. So that was that's a significant driver of the difference between the orange and the blue. The other driver is that we decided to use the DHC for the existing assets. And again, that was because we realised that if we used replacement cost, we were going to be recharging people that already paid, because those new assets have been already depreciated to a degree. And then another part of it, of course, of the difference is really driven by the fact that the residual charge is being allocated across industrials and distributors with a single allocator methodology. So that's actually lightened the burden on the distributors and increased the burden on the major industrials. So that accounts for the difference between the blue and the orange. Then in red is, well, we're thinking that our residual charge is really going to remove a lot of the incentive for people to continue to pay for distributed generation or for demand response. So currently distributors make these ACOT payments, avoided cost of transmission payments, to distributed generation, and a lot of the incentive for that would disappear under the proposal. So if all of it disappeared, so we're just choosing an extreme example, then the red bar is what would apply in terms of the dollar per year impact on the household. And you can, hard to see from where you are, but in the top energy area, for example, there's a big difference between the blue and the red bar. In other words, if you take into account the ACOT and the impact there, if there was no further ACOT paid, there'd be a very, very minimal increase in dollar per year charges to households in the top energy area. Of course, top energy owns the distributed generation, which is NAFA, so there's a corresponding reduction in the return on that plant. So as community shareholders, they get on one hand through the price, but they lose on the other hand through loss of shareholder value, if you like, through their community trust. So perhaps in regard to the top energy area, in a financial impact, it's the blue bar. In terms of the impact on electricity prices, it's the red bar. So I'll probably belabour that a bit much, but anyway, I think we could go through various different outliers. I had a slide in there that was going to do that. We can come back to this if you wish, I think, in questions.
We could have the actual slides now. We could stop for questions and they could be loaded if you wanted to speak to that.
I think most of the changes I made have already covered. Why don't we finish off, then load it, and we can use it then. Thank you, John. Actually, it's there. Someone's loaded it while we were... Brilliant. Okay. I know how this has happened because I asked Alistair to do it last night, and he put it in this pack, and I transferred it into my pack. Okay, this is why. All right, so... good timing, but so this chart here shows you the impact of the proposal at the household level or at the customer group level in terms of dollars per megawatt hour. So we'd previously shown you the $1 million per year. This is the dollars per megawatt hour, so it's just the charge divided by megawatt hours of each customer.
In the actual document?
Yes, I believe they're all. There's nothing in our presentations that isn't... Page number for Molly? They'll find it for you. So, well, the idea isn't to read the individual bits, this is the big picture. And the big picture here is that the red dashed line is the average across lines companies. And I'm going to show you some highlights in a minute, but you can see that looking at the generators in the middle there, there's a reduction there, identifies the reduction for Meridian and for Contact as a result of the move from HVDC to area of benefit, and a reduction for Pioneer for similar reasons, a slight reduction for Trustpower, and then some of the other generators picking up some area of benefit charges. On the right hand side is the industrials, and the big standout there is Kiwi Rail. Couldn't fit it on the chart. That actually illustrates what's going on here, the Kiwi Rail story. And that is because we're allocating the residual based on physical capacity, Kiwi Rail has a very spiky need for load. It's when their electric trains are taking off, they spike and they use a lot of load. But their average load is very low. So they need a lot of capacity to cope with very intermittent, well, not intermittent, it's regular, isn't it? But very spiky load. So the actual $1 million impacts on Kiwi Rail are fairly modest, about 2 million, I believe it was. But the dollar per megawatt hour, because they have a very low load on average, it looks off the chart. Now this next one is to identify the outliers from the previous chart. So on the left-hand side, you can see electricity Ashburton. Compared to 2015, there was actually almost no impact on electricity Ashburton. But what has happened is, because we are proposing the allocation to be based on shares of physical capacity rather than the current interconnection, which is RCPD. Under RCPD, in that region, Ashburton, in that whole region, it's a winter peak. But Ashburton is a summer peak because of their irrigation. So under the current TPM, despite the fact that Ashburton have all the capacity that everybody else has, they just use it at a different time of the year when everybody else does. So under the current TPM, with the grey bar, they've been paying a very low transmission charge. And the proposal results in them paying roughly what others are paying. It's a big jump relative to others. It's actually about $117 extra per year per household if ACOT is continued. But it's actually still below the average, that red dashed line. The other one there, we can take the second and third one, so North Power and Top Energy. You can see that that both of them have a jump in terms of the payments, and that's largely reflecting two things. For North Power, it's reflecting the area benefit charge. For Top Energy, it's the area benefit charge, but it's also because of their distributed generation. And therefore, under the residual charge, they pick up more of the residual charge than they do with interconnection. And Vector, the same story for Vector as North Power, it's the area of benefits. So as we showed you earlier, the benefits they get from the grid upgrades are substantially greater than these increases in charges. And West Power, their adjustment there, I think I detailed that before, but essentially it's just the the change in the threshold for the area benefit charge, and also, like Top Energy, they have distributed generation, so they get affected by that. This chart here was just to show you the load factor, how that affects the charges. We'll come back to that if you've got questions. I want to get on to the prudent discount policy. We talked about it earlier. We should have put a phasing in for this so you could see it easily, but the essence of this is the orange bar for each of these networks is the proposal, but if there were $30 million worth of prudent discounts, then that light blue bar would apply. But don't think of it as an increase, because if those parties that get a prudent discount were actually going to leave and close down their New Zealand plants, then the dark blue bar is actually what would have happened. Roughly, this is hypothetical. So we've got a $50 million impact if party exits, but if you give a $30 million discount, then you're still collecting $20 million net, and the people stay, and they pay for the incremental cost as well as the contribution to common costs. So you can see that's a net economic gain for the country and a gain for consumers. I wanted to just very quickly show you this. I'm not going to go through all these at all, but this is the cost-benefit analysis done by Oakley, Greenwood and Melbourne, and for all the sensitivities, the payoffs are greater than 200 million except for one, and it's close to 200 million there. Their core baseline is for 20 years, 8% discount, a $213 million net present value economic benefit from the authority's proposal. a key part of what we've written in the paper is that we feel that there are unquantified benefits. So Oakley Greenwood have focused on quantified benefits, then they've got a discussion of areas that they weren't able to quantify, and we've elaborated on that and given our view as well on that in the paper. And we think there's pretty substantial benefits. One of the ones that Oakley Greenwood didn't feel they could cost up or could, work out benefits was improved scrutiny of transmission investments. And the authority board is pretty strong on this. It does feel that having a TPM that shoots charges home to people that benefit and receive a service will probably more than likely lead to people actually providing the information that's relevant to that and testing and scrutinising those investments because they're going to pay for them. And then reduce cost of disputes and reduce cost of uncertainty, because this is a very principled charge, principled approach. Service-based, cost-reflective is the principle that runs right through. Right. We can come back to this. Next steps, we are still picking a 1 April 2019 for implementing the TPM if it takes effect, and we'll come back to the ACOT arrangements soon. Right, I want to very briefly cover distributed generation before we take questions. What we are proposing, first of all, what's wrong with the DGPPs, distributed generation pricing principles? Our problem with them is that they provide the wrong price signals. So distributors under the current regime have to apply an incremental cost regime for DG. So they are not collecting from DG any contribution to common costs for their network. But you've got other parties, consumers that have businesses, small, large industrial consumers that might be connected, they are paying for common costs. So you're distorting the production decisions by keeping that in place, because some other productive parts of the sector have to pay and others don't. So that's a real problem in our view. So that's issue number one around connection services. Issue number two is that ACOT issue that I think many of you are pretty familiar with. We put out a working paper on it, and we do think that what it's leading to is the investment in DG when and where it's actually not needed, putting in place when we've got lots of spare capacity, and in locations we've got lots of spare transmission capacity, and then it's been operated when in fact it's not reducing costs at all. So, but someone's got to pay for those payments that are going to that DG. It gets added to the bill for consumers. So it's a growing problem. Since 2007, we've seen we've seen a trebling, and that's because of the investments in the transmission grid, the higher interconnection rate. They pay DG to avoid that interconnection rate, so the ACOT's been shooting up. Just aware of time. This is just showing that actually most of the ACOT has been going to DG that's in the lower South Island and lower North Island. Definitely areas where we think there's obvious spare transmission capacity. So our proposal is to, we've talked about this link to the TPM. What we're proposing to do is not to rewrite the DGPPs, but just to remove them. And just say to distributors, go and use the same pricing principles you use for any other customer, particularly other industrial, commercial customers. We've been in discussions with Transpower, and they're very willing and able to. So the other element to it is that we're saying for ACOT, if it's about avoiding transmission costs, how about Transpower decide? They know when their transmission costs can be reduced, and they know when the transmission investments are coming up. And they are already contracting through the DR program to contract with people to reduce demand, to reduce their and defer transmission investments. So how about Transpower do the same thing here? So what we're suggesting in regard to ACOT is that it's actually the responsibility for making that decision and for having contracts with DG will shift from distributors to Transpower. And we've been in discussions with the Commerce Commission and Transpower to to have that all workable and things to work through there, but it's all very doable. The economic benefits, this is produced by, is this produced internally or who are the consultants? Concept produced these economic benefits analysis. Under the current TPM, we are picking that the economic benefits are somewhere between 2 and 21.7 million. But of course, as we've been telling you, the current, if we put in place the area benefit and residual charge approach, it would lead to a lot of efficiency gains on its own, even if we left the DGPPs there. And so the economic benefits, if we did the TPM proposal, are much lower. It's just essentially that we'll get efficiency earlier. It's going to take time to do the TPM, so you can get them earlier. The financial benefits to consumers accrue in the form of lower electricity prices for them, lower charges coming from distributors, and so under the current TPM, over a 20-year period, the financial payoff for consumers is up to 325 million net present value reduction in electricity charges to consumers. Last slide, I think. Proposal has limited impacts on other matters. We're very much aware of the competition issue. We don't think subsidising some forms of generation through ACOT aids competition. In fact, it's actually harmful for competition. You want a level playing field, and removing the DGPPs would provide a more level playing field. On security supply, I rewrote that bit last night, so it's not showing there, but the essence of our security supply is that we don't see it as having an impact on security supply for two reasons. One, most of the DG has very low SRMC, very low variable costs. So they will still operate even if they don't get ACOT. They've already been built. There's no use exiting. You're just going to hurt, just going to, be worse. You'll still run your DG and earn the market revenue. So those DG will stay. We don't think there'll be hardly any, if any, that would leave. And then secondly, we think, well, subsidising some generation actually crowds out other generation. And so why would there be an impact on reliability and security supply, particularly in the longer term? Climate change, there's often a lot of claims that DG is great for the climate. Actually, it's not any better than grid-connected generation. They both have around about 80% is renewable. But more than that, 95% of consented pipeline for new generation is renewable. So we don't see there's an issue there. It's not relevant. The supposed environmental impacts are not relevant for our proposal. Regional employment. The DG folks see themselves as located in the regions, but I haven't noticed many big power stations in cities. Most of them are actually out where the rivers and lakes are, and so there's that's where the regional employment effects are as well. And regulatory risk, well, I think by now, after 5.5 years of the authority, people would begin to understand that we are adamant we will pursue our statutory objective. And it's very similar to the objectives for the Commerce Commission that have been in place for some time. It's got elements of what were there under the Electricity Commission. We have been following it, and when we see opportunities to improve the outcome for consumers by improving economic efficiency and achieving our statutory objective, we'll do it. So while sometimes things that we do can sometimes seem as a surprise, if you look at it, you can see it's very consistent with our statutory objective. Oh, this is the chart that you're probably all familiar with, shows that grid-connected generation is actually slightly more renewable than DG. The proposed change will be phased in 2 phases for DGPP. So we're proposing that from 1 April 2017, the lower North Island and lower South Island DG would need to have contracted with Transpower if Transpower believes that those DG would actually defer transmission investment. Hard to see in a lot of circumstances because there's a lot of transmission capacity there. Second phase would be from 1 April 2018 for the Upper North and Upper South Island. Right, better leave it there and I'll direct questions to the panel. Well, Brent might be doing that. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Carl. I'm sure you all have plenty of questions. It'd be useful if you identified yourself before you asked your question, and wait until the microphones arrive so everybody can hear it and the people who are wanting to ask questions microphone so that we can record it as well. Thank you very much. First question.
Marianne Mitchell, representing Pioneer Energy. Has Transpower been consulted about the timeframe for implementing the changes to Part 6 of the Code?
Do you want to answer this, Carl?
Yes, we have had discussion.
It's working.
Okay. Thank you, Marianne. Yes, we've had discussions with Transpower about that and also with the Comms Commission, and there's some details to work through, but our proposal is for 1 April 2017 for the lower, based on those discussions we've had with those parties.
There appear to be no other questions. Molly, I was very surprised, Molly, that you didn't have... we've called Molly, so we'll have Molly first and then we'll move on. But make it a question, Molly, please.
Yes. Have you calculated the effect on the average household consumer aggregated on overall households of the new proposal compared with first the present household charges and second the previous TPM? And have you done the same for industrial and commercial consumers?
Well, I can answer the question myself, but I'll hand it over to Carl.
Okay, thank you, Molly. We have calculated, because we had that blue and red, whether ACOT continues or discontinues. But on average, averaging those two, to make it simple. Okay, yeah, okay. My recollection is that the impact on household electricity bills overall for New Zealand would be 0.13% if ACOT was discontinued, and 0.9% if ACOT continued. Of course, in our proposal, it is very unlikely that ACOT would continue in its current form. The first number I gave is going to be much closer to the reality, but of course there will be some ACOT payments for some deferrals, so it would be a little bit higher than 0.13%. The dollar impact was under 0.13%. I think it was about $3 per year for their household, and $18 under the 0.9%. No, I haven't. I don't recall it for the industrial consumers.
But they're the initial effects, Molly. You've got to go forward and say, well, if you do have, as Oakley Greenwood's put in their cost-benefit study, some impact on the efficiency of arrangements going forward, then overall consumers will benefit from that. And so one is actually seeing a benefit in the long term for consumers, which is the statutory objective of the authority.
Conrad Edwards.
Conrad?
Question more or less about the impact of the methodology in the physical sense. You put up lots of graphs on the financial implications for various parties of the methodologies, and you mentioned with the removal of ACOT that there might not be any impact on security of supply, though the arguments seem to be more of an energy than a sort of peak basis. We're very interested in the moment in the load forecast in the Upper North Island with thermal decommissioning and underlying growth and all that. I was wondering whether you'd done any analysis of a sort of physical nature, megawatts, on the impact of ACOT removal on peak load forecasts.
Carl?
No, so we haven't done that analysis. I think, David, that is correct? No, so we haven't done that analysis.
The gentleman here in the
Hi, yeah, Matthew Spooner from Pioneer Energy as well. I just wondered with the prudent discount policy, whether you'd, for example, if a large customer was leaving and it may have some effects on, for example, spot prices, whether that gets taken into account when you consider, the prudent discount. Sure, they might leave and there might be $50 million worth of connection charges or transmission charges lost, but if the spot price dropped, there might be a net benefit to the whole country in that way.
Carl will answer this question.
Yeah, thank you for your question. The element of the impact in the market depends on the market dynamics, and so with putting that aside, if you have a major player leaving, then it increases the transmission charge on everybody else, and then there is the offsetting effect for a period of time, perhaps, maybe a pretty short period of time, where demand for the generation or supply will then adjust to that, and quite a lot of the legacy contracts that generators have had for fuel and so on have now burnt off. So what we have seen is, over the last 12 months, quite a lot of discussion about supply and whether it will remain in the market. So I think it'd be reasonable to assume that supply would adjust pretty quickly to demand reductions, particularly if it was a sizable demand reduction. And so the net impact on, like the wholesale electricity price could be pretty much neutral. It could come down for a period of time, maybe 6 months or something, but you would expect the market to reach equilibrium again. It's just a question of how long, and that's the dynamics. We haven't done modelling around that. So, in terms of the chart that we put up there, I think it's pretty reasonable to say that a prudent discount in the right circumstances avoids the overall cost going up to consumers.
Gentleman down here.
Hi, Grant Smith from Pioneer. Seems a very inquisitive company. I'm just interested, Carl, in the relationship between that area benefit, which you said was going to be set and forget once, and the PDA, which seemed to be an opportunity to get a discount for a business at risk. How's that all going to be done all at the same time?
Carl?
Yeah, thank you, Grant. Just remember, I guess on the area benefit charge, I'm saying that in principle it's set and forget once, but we did go through that there can be a material change in circumstance, and so if that alters, if there's any reason to believe it really alters the distribution of benefits, then that can be reconsidered. And we would be looking for Transpower to identify a threshold so that that kind of thing doesn't happen very often, that kind of recalculation of the lifetime benefits of an investment. But of course, it'd be quite a significant factor for Transpower to do that, because it then would be showing, well, what's the economic payoff from its investments. In terms of the PDP, the way that we've talked about it is that a party, if it was successful in getting a discount, that discount would be linked quite automatically to some factor that was relevant. And so I don't envisage it being other than a pretty simple kind of calculation of discounts if they are in fact varying over time. So I don't see it as particularly burdensome on a transmission supplier, and in fact certainly it's the kind of thing that most businesses do in the work to be competitive market. They're constantly thinking about their customers, constantly thinking about how to deliver better services, and constantly thinking about their pricing around that. And I think for large asset managers, one of the things coming into the future with new technology and competition around the edges, particularly for lines businesses, including Transpower, is that there will need to be more attention to how the world is changing around them. And so, more resources will be applied to that area anyway. But I think in terms of the pricing aspect, I don't see it as a material amount of additional work. I think it'll be a lot less work overall in a way, because having a pricing regime which is based on some very clear principles actually means that you will have a lot less of this. What have we had? Almost 10 years of debate and ongoing, views that are widely dispersed, fundamentally divergent views. If we can settle on this principled approach, then okay, there will be lobbying and arguments put forward, but it'll be about honing and getting it working better and better, especially as technology changes and we can do things better and get the parameters better. So that'll all be very productive kind of activity going on, and instead of this sort of very divergent, totally different ideas. So I think overall the burden on Transpower will be lower than under the current regime in terms of resourcing and administering the pricing regime.
Can I just respond to your question, having a bit more thought, Conrad, about the analysis? So we haven't done the analysis, but as Carl indicated, Transpower will do that type of analysis to determine whether DG going forward actually avoids transmission costs. So that is the proposal. So that analysis we do expect to be undertaken by Transpower, as Carl indicated.
Are there any other questions? Appear not to be, so we'll take one more. Almost too late, but...
Hi, I'm Irene from Contact Energy. Just in relation to your comment on the 200 million of unallocated costs and overhead, is that part of the 900? Is it on top of, or is it currently in the 500 million?
Yeah, it's part of the 900 million that we had there. So, Transpower's costs for 2015-16, the regulated revenue they can recover is 917 million. I rounded it, and they've got a forecast, but that 200 million is in there. So what we're saying with the surcharge is take the $200 million out, work out these other charges to get the residual based on, without the 200 million, and then just have a surcharge. So I think it was around about a 40% surcharge.
No,
28%. That's right. So for every charge, like you'd have the connection charge, the area benefit charge, and residual charge, you'd multiply each of them by 1.28 to recover the full amount. So, that's pretty interesting. 28% of costs just in that bucket.
Okay, well, I did say we'd finish the questions after this one, so I think... we probably have time. We can take two more. That's it. Right. The lady here, followed by the man over there.
Right, I'm Catherine Hume from Marlborough Lions. My question is whether you have run any sensitivity and presented it in the paper if you used the different estimate of physical capacity to allocate the residual.
Thank you very much. No, we haven't done additional allocators for the residual charge. We're very much wanting people to understand that what we're consulting on today is the guidelines for the TPM, and given that it's a choice for Transpower to come to us with the precise allocators, we don't want to do that work. That's for the next stage. So what we're presenting by way of the financial impacts is very indicative. Don't take them as estimates, they're indicative, but it's sufficient for you to get a sense of how it might affect you and your businesses, and to make an informed submission for this level. The board's decision in October, November is to decide on the guidelines, and then there's another round from Transpower. If we adopt new guidelines, then Transpower proposes a TPM, and there will be more accurate estimates. They could be quite different in some cases if they make some quite different judgments about what kind of benefit methodology to use and which of those allocators for the residual.
And the gentleman over here.
Yes, just interested in with the $200 million that Transpower collects, the unallocated portion or the unaccounted portion. Is there an expectation that will go down once you start, looking into every single investment down to less than $5 million? And finally, and the last question is, will there be some sort of undertaking that once you've made all these changes that you promise not to change anything again for quite a while, so we all have some certainty? Yeah.
All right. To address the first question, look, it's not my place to speculate on what might happen to Transpower's costs in regard to overhead, but I think you can see the unallocated operational cost probably reflects the current TPM, where it just isn't important for them to allocate the costs because it's a interconnection charge that isn't location specific. It's just a bucket, gets spread, so why do you have to go and be more specific than that? And I suspect by having the area benefit charge, which will become increasingly important over time, because the number of assets in the residual charge will shrink as any asset gets refurbished, replaced or upgraded, that will then be caught by the area benefit charge. So you can expect A, the residual to go down and the area benefit bucket to go up, but B, you can expect them to reallocate those operational costs, right, because it starts becoming important. So whether the true costs go down, that's up to Transpower, but I could imagine that the assignment of the costs into different buckets could change. It's not really possible for today's regulator to make a commitment about for what a future board of the authority might do. So we can't make that promise, but I can say that there's plenty of work there for Transpower and the industry to, if we adopt these guidelines, to go and implement them. One of the things I didn't mention was that the standard method for the area benefit would come in from 1 April 2019. There's a lot of work to put that in place, but we think it's doable. Particularly if it shows our kind of approach, be quite doable. The simplified method, what we're saying is get the standard method done, bed it in for a couple of years, and then go and do the simplified method, because there's about 400 million a year in there, but it's actually about, was it 200 projects or something? Okay, there's a whole lot of projects, and so, just iron out any bugs, get the standard method working best, and then go and do the simplified method. So the requirement in the guidelines is for Transpower to propose to the authority a transition plan for the simplified area benefit that applies to the below 5 million assets, and the obligation on Transpower would be to do it as soon as reasonably practicable. But we want them to get the area benefit philosophy locked and loaded.
So, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for attending, and I'm sure you've got a lot of paper to read and digest. So, we will be engaging with a number of parties who wish to engage with us directly, and with whom we will be answering their specific questions, but we thank you for your attendance today.